טוב, אז אני שיר פרי, אני DevRel בסולוטו, ואני סופר מתרגשת להיות פה. אז בואו נספר כמה מילים על הקהילה שלנו. אז מפגש ראשון, תכלס הרשמי שלנו, סופר מתרגשים שאמיר פה איתנו, אז על מה נדבר? על מלא דברים. ניפגש פעם בחודש, כל פעם... מה? וואי, קשה. נשתדל להיפגש פעם בחודש, אבל מה שחשוב להגיד שזה קהילה של האנשים בה. כלומר, החברות שאנחנו כולנו עובדים בהן, נשמח להתארח. אנחנו יכולים להיות המרצים, פה יש קבוצה שאנחנו יכולים ללמד אחד את השני. כבר בועז יבוא לדבר, אבל הרבה פעמים מגיעים מרצים מחול, אנשים סופר מעניינים שעניינו אותנו לשמוע, בואו תביאו אותם, כאילו אנחנו נרצה שנעשה את זה באמת ביחד. אז הנושאים שנדבר עליהם זה community ו-culture, measuring value in ROI, building channels and tools, כמו נגיד engineering blog, R&D presence, CFP, איך מגישים, וכל דבר אחר שמעניין אותנו. אז כולם, אתם יכולים לצלם את זה, ככה עוקבים אחרינו, זה כל הערוצים, ההרצאה הזאת גם תעלה ליוטיוב, זה ה-DevRel IL, כל הציוצים לזה, זה DevRel קו תחתון IL, בנוסף, תרימו רגע מי שהתפקיד שלו הוא DevRel או משהו דומה. עכשיו, מי לא נמצא בקבוצת וואטסאפ שהוא DevRel? אחלה. דברו איתי בסוף, נכניס אתכם. הקבוצת וואטסאפ היא קצת יותר אקסקלוסיבית, רק לאנשים שממש עושים ממש עם DevRel, Developer Evangelist בחברות שלהם. אז זהו. מי ה-organizers? אז אנחנו בעצם, זה הקהילה של כולנו, אבל כל יוזמה סופר מבורכת, בואו דברו איתנו, בואו נעשה דברים, אז תגידו שלום, הנה ג'רמי שם, שרון, עם יוסף, בועז, וגם אני, דברו איתנו, נשמח, תביאו את ההצעות, נשמח שבאמת זה קהילה, שאנחנו רק התחלנו פה, וזה יהיה משהו ממש ממש גדול, אז תודה רבה, ועכשיו להוסט שלנו, בועז, ניתן לו כמה מילים.
טוב, אז שלום לכולם, ברוכים הבאים. מי שלא מכיר אותי, שמי בועז זינימן, אני טכניקל אבנג'ליסט פה של AWS, ברוכים הבאים לפלור 28. עוד הוא? אני אעשה לך קיו. ומה שרציתי להגיד זה שהקומה הזאת כולה, מי שעדיין לא ביקר פה, אז כדאי שידע שהקומה הזאת כולה נבנתה ונועדה על מנת לארח אירועים של AWS, של פרטנרים של AWS, של לקוחות של AWS ושל הקומיוניטי. יש לכם רעיון לאירוע, אתם רוצים לעשות משהו איתנו או לבד, יש לכם מיטאפ שאתם מנהלים, קבוצה או כל דבר אחר, אתם יותר מוזמנים להגיע לפה, דברו איתי, אני פה, אפשר למצוא אותי בכל מדיה אפשרית, ואנחנו מאוד מאוד נשמח לארח אתכם, בשביל זה הקומה הזאת קיימת, ושוב, מפגש ראשון של הקבוצה הזאת, אני מקווה שפעם הבאה נהיה כפול, ואחרי זה כפול ועוד ועוד ועוד. יש לנו כבר תוכניות למפגשים הבאים, אנחנו נספר על המפגש של מרץ? כן? אוקיי. לא הייתי בטוח, אז אני צריך אישור. בלי אישור אני לא מדבר. אז במרץ אנחנו מתכננים לארח פה את איין מסינגהם, שהוא הבוס שלי, וה-Head of Evangelism ב-AWS, הוא הולך להגיע לפה לסאמיט שלנו שיהיה במרץ, ונכון לעכשיו אם לא יהיו שינויים, אנחנו ב-11 או ב-12? 11 או 12 למרץ נארח מפגש נוסף של DevRel IL עם איין מסינגהם, אולי יהיה גם מפגש בפברואר, אנחנו עדיין לא יודעים, אנחנו עדיין עובדים על זה, אבל כמובן אנחנו נוציא הזמנות מסודרות ואתם יותר מוזמנים להצטרף. זהו, תודה רבה, ואני רוצה להזמין את אמיר. אתה בא? יאללה.
אני אתן לאמיר קצת אינפו, למי שלא מכיר, אמיר is the VP Developer Experience at Twitch these days, אבל לפני זה היה בסלאק, לפני זה היה בגוגל, probably one of the best DevRels that's an expatriate at this point, אבל מקורו בישראל. אנחנו מאוד מתכבדים להזמין אותו פה לאבנט הרשמי הראשון שלנו. אז בבקשה, אמיר, the talk will be in English only because we're recording it, and we want to be able to share our content from the local community to the global community, כי אני חושבת שאנחנו מוצאים מפה דברים מאוד מאוד טובים. So thank you, Amir. And
everybody's okay with an English presentation?
Fantastic.
Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm very excited that we're having this meetup. I've always felt alone when I was initially at DevRel. and now we have a room full of people who are interested in developer relations. So this is awesome. Woohoo! Oh, we can compete on Wow. This is a mishmash of presentations that I've done for DevRel events in San Francisco throughout the years. I try to gather as much information into one presentation. So if you notice slight theme change, please forgive me. I'm not a designer. At any moment, if this is boring, we can go to another slideshow about my life in New Zealand. I lived there for 2 years, had a lot of fun, so we can go through the slides there. Basically, right now, I'm not a developer relations person, but 10% of my organization is actually developer relations. So I'm also will be able to give you the viewpoint of how I measure developer relations. Because for my organization, I need to decide whether I hire a developer relation, or I hire an engineer, or I hire a product person, or I hire a partnership person. So I'd love to give you some insights. Please, at any moment, ask questions. I'll also give us an opportunity to ask questions at the end. Cool? Awesome. So this was the meta. I apologize that you have to see me twice. This is me. My Twitter handle, if you want to hear about product and developer relations things. I started at Microsoft. I started in a few startups, sold one, crashed another two, so that was okay. And then moved to Microsoft to actually do developer relations. Before I was in Microsoft, I was in a startup that decided to go open source. Why? Because they wanted distribution. But when they open sourced their software, they found out that they now have developers, opinionated developers, that want to contribute code. So they took one of the engineers, which was me, and told me, handle that mess. We don't know how to deal with those developers. They're sending us PRs, they're sending us bugs. We don't know how to do that. Please handle that. And I fell in love with the profession. I fell in love with the ability to create something that other developers build on top of. Building a platform, if you think about your phone and how useful it is, it's all about the apps, right? You remember, what was the most useful app in Nokia? So the snake, exactly. Exactly, the snake. I spent so many hours on that snake, right? But now it's nothing in comparison. I wonder who developed that snake. And then so I talked a lot about open source, and then Microsoft said, why don't you join us and talk about not open source? And I presented, I work with Israeli startups to work on the .NET platform and WPF and all that fun stuff in SharePoint. I have a lot of friends who don't talk to me about technology since then. And then I went to New Zealand for 2 years, was awesome, went back to engineering, came back and joined Google. Again, to start developer relations here, to be patient zero for Google developer relations in Israel. It was an awesome experience. We opened campus. How many of you been to campus? So awesome. So I was one of the founding members of campus together with Eyal Miller and Professor Yossi Matias. And then it was successful, and I was asked to do this around the world. So I was asked to move to the States, and me and my wife were like, no, we're not moving. We just came. I got the surround system. If you're like me, that is a sign that you know that you own a home when you have the surround system set up. And then we moved. We moved with Google to manage the Launchpad program, which is the startup program for Google all around the world. It was an awesome experience. And then 2 years later, an ex-Googler called April Underwood called me and said, hey, we're opening a platform for Slack. We're a small startup in San Francisco. Why don't you join us? And I'm like, yeah, I like Slack. It's awesome. And then I joined Slack. How many of you use Slack? Awesome. So you all use my software. This is great. When I joined Slack, we were 150 people. Our platform strategy was, we're going to launch a platform. We didn't know what's going to be successful or not. There were a lot of questions. It was a lot of fun. We figured out how to build a platform. And we moved from 1,000 developers when we started to 250,000 developers 2 years later with weekly active tokens. So that was a pretty awesome experience. And if you're bad with your statistics, you would say correlation equals causation, and I choose companies based on the color of their logos. And that is false, because a year ago, a company called Twitch, you see? Correlation versus causation. Exactly. They mix the colors. I like that. A company called Twitch offered me to do the same challenge of building a developer tool set and to engage with a whole new audience. And I moved from enterprise messaging into gaming, which was pretty awesome. My job right now, my team's job, is to build the tools and services, the APIs, the infrastructure for developers such as Blizzard and Riot and EA and other big game names to integrate with Twitch. For those of you who don't know, Twitch is an awesome platform that lets people stream their games and create communities around their game in a live experience. How many of you use Twitch? Awesome, thank you, 20%. Soon it will be more than that. Just to give you an example of how big watching games is, if you know about a game called Fortnite, Fortnite has been watched 17,000 years in the first 6 months of Twitch. Okay, that's 2 hours for every man, woman, and child in Europe. Okay, and that's for one game in the first 6 months of last year. So it's a pretty awesome and big opportunity there. So I'm a VP of product. I also have engineering. We can talk about that. And I also have a developer relations org inside my org. And because I have a lot of spare time and being a VP is very easy, I also write books. So I wrote a book about bots, about conversational interfaces, and how software is going to talk to us, and how Alexa and Google Home and Slack bots and Messenger bots. And also last year, I wrote a book about designing APIs that don't suck. The last 4 chapters of that book, by the way, is I'm going to cover in this session. Okay? So you can buy only the first part of the book. Awesome. So we talked about this. This is Twitch. What we want to do is enable developers to build on Twitch and to create immersive experiences, live experiences on Twitch. So to turn viewers into active participants. We want viewers that watch you play Fortnite be able to heal you, or to choose who to kill, or to choose who to heal. That's the awesome experience that we want to create. And we're actually doing a lot of that with PUBG, with Fortnite, with FIFA, with all the big games. Okay, so let's start with, so this was opening, and you're all, yes, we know Amir now. Now let's talk about why DevRel. And I'm going to be contrarian here, and please feel free to say, Amir, you're saying bullshit. Why should we do developer relations? And my biggest premise here is we shouldn't. It's a bad idea. Most of the cases, building a developer community is a bad idea. It's expensive. It is. We are engineers by trade. We're paid like engineers, but we don't contribute code. That's a deal that kind of sucks for the company, right? So why should you build a developer relations? For most companies, for most startups, it is a bad idea to build an API and to build a developer relations. I'm sorry, that is the open statement of DevRel IL, but I stand behind it. I've seen a lot of startups that say, yeah, we're doing this, but we're also building an API. And developers will come and love it and make it awesome. If it's not connected to the core of your business, you shouldn't do an API and you shouldn't do a DevRel. You should do API and DevRel only when there's strong alignment between what your business does and what your company and what developer relations aim to do. So a phone is a good example of something that you can't make useful without a developer platform, right? A phone now, the difference between an iOS and Android and Windows Mobile is that two of them have a thriving developer ecosystem and the other one doesn't. And that's what makes us all choose the right phone, because we have an Uber and we have a Lyft here and we have Spotify. We have a set of developer innovation on this device. Same thing for web, right? What would be the web without all the innovation of developers? So the only place I would actually invest in building a developer ecosystem is if the product is much more better and much more valuable if you have developers building on top of that. Does that make sense? Do we all agree on that? Perfect. So for Slack, for example, why did we start with developer relations? Because we saw direct correlation. More than 90% of our paid teams use the platform. So we looked at, it's correlation versus causation, but 90% of the teams that pay for Slack use the APIs of Slack, right? So that's a good reason to drive the business to understand that the platform is really valuable. There's a question there, or just like waving? Just waving. Okay, awesome. Actually, if you look, question. Sorry, why Twitch? Because so our first interaction, we want interactivity. We want, for our streamers, we want three things: money, fame, and love. We want them to monetize their viewers. We want them to create a sustainable community, and we want a lot of viewers to come and see them, to create a community of around the streamer. Chat is a good first interaction of interactivity. We believe that interactivity is a key to creating a community. We want to create thousands of these type of interactions. And if we don't do that with the participation of the game developers and developers all around the world, then Twitch becomes not as interactive, not as valuable as it is without the developers. For Slack, it was all about the correlation between actually using the platform and paying for the platform. Yes?
There's a bit of a paradox here. You're saying you shouldn't invest in APIs unless you know you need to, but you're also saying you make a decision based on the knowledge.
Great. That's a great question. So that's a great, what's the difference between a good question and a great question? A good question is I have a slide somewhere in the future. A great question is the next slide. So we started without a developer relations. We started without an API. Slack started with building the first 64 integrations themselves. So they said, we have an ecosystem around us, we're gonna worry about that. And they actually hired 2 engineers, which I really love, who spent a year building all these integrations without the help of developers. They used they were DevRel. They used the other people's API to integrate into Twitch. But to Slack, sorry. But the problem was that the requirements from our customers, they wanted to integrate not to 64 tools, they want to integrate to 1,000 tools. So they open up the API, and it was like, okay, the developer said, this is awesome, but we want much more. And then they open up the platform, and they launch the platform. And once people are really the value of the platform was realized without a developer integration. It was really tied into the core targets of the company, because the audience was developers. Developers told us through NPS, through Net Promoter Score, that the integrations are super, super important, and this is why they're choosing the product. And then they open up the platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it leaves one other possibility on the table. When you started writing those integrations and your customers liked them, you could just as well offer further integration as professional services. Pay us and we'll develop an integration for you. What made you not do that and instead open up the API?
It's a great question, and it ties into the magical word of the Silicon Valley, which is scale. If you want to do that at scale, right now there's thousands of integrations. You couldn't do that with professional services. I could call your boss and tell him that.
Or it changes the DNA of the organization. Like
IBM having like 50%.
Yeah, you can move. Yeah, you can do Microsoft consulting services, but even then, you don't own it. And if you think about it, there's an ongoing technical debt. Just the amount of technical debt that we paid for those 64 initial integrations that we maintained. Every time a developer changed their API, we had to update our app. That was a toll that was too expensive. It's too expensive for companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon. Like when you have this type of thing, you have to rely on developers. And I can talk to your manager. I'm easy, not cheap. Okay, so tie it, and it's going to be in the test. Tie it to the end of to the end goal of the company, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Hey, Natasha. Okay, so how to DevRel? The next two slides. After the next two slides, you can go and sleep because the next two slides are the key for the way I run DevRel. No, the next two slides. This is an example of how to build a DevRel org. This is how Slack runs their developer org. Advocacy is breadth. So we segment our developers into two segments, breadth and depth. Depth are the top developers. This is Salesforce and SAP and Concur and Shopify and all the big names that you know, Jira and Asana and all the tools that are integrated. These are the top developers. And then you have the rest of the world, all the rest of the developers, right? You understand? Top developers, every other developer. Advocacy is all about breadth. Their job is to move developers through the funnel of building into your platform. Partnership is all about depth. These are people who go and talk to your top partners and come back with a quality integration, right? So one of them is one to few. Partnership engineering is one to few, and advocacy is one to many. Advocacy go to events and they do hackathons. Partnership go and do workshop and design sprint with the partner. And then you have enterprise architects. That's the people who work that's like the post-sales integration, working with big clients and making sure that they integrate. And then content writers, these are people who create content at scale. Tutorials, hands-on labs, and so forth. And now the two slides that are most important. Yeah.
This sort of intersects with other parts of the organization, like the marketing, like the sales,
Yeah.
like the professional services.
So how do you choose?
Because you sort of scoped it as part of the developer relations. So how do you manage that, or is that directly under you, or like dotted line? How do you manage?
So at Slack, this was not dotted line. These were the 4 pillars of developer relations.
So content writers, for instance, were dedicated for DevRel, unrelated to the content writers for marketing.
Yes, 100%.
Enterprise architects.
Yes.
Dedicated, unrelated.
100%. And I strongly believe in direct management. Metric management sucks. And I'm sure I'm going to work in a company that has metric manager, so I apologize for my future metric manager. But I strongly believe that if you don't have if you have metric management, you have a lot more politics, and it ruins relationships. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah. One of the questions I have around content writers, does that mean like content? Do you mean by that like content engineer, or somebody who's writing about content?
So all of the people that I employ in developer relations need to be an engineer.
Right, because I think it's really critical because often people see content writer and they think, oh, it's just a technical writer, or
No.
blogger, or whatever.
None of my DevRel, yeah, 100%. I totally agree. The comment was you need to have someone who's an actual engineer that, from my perspective, dog fooding is a very critical point of doing a technical writing, because if you haven't built for the platform, it's like you don't know where it sucks, right? You don't know where it's broken and where you need to articulate in a better article about how to what to write. By the way, one of the things that we've done, this is a hack. We worked really closely with our support team, and for every week we asked them what is the most common developer ticket, And for that ticket, we wrote an article the week after. And on this, this was an ongoing process every week. What is the most common developer ticket? What is the most common developer ticket? So that we built our content around the pains of our customers. Does that make sense? Cool. Awesome. So I think this is, from my perspective, the essence of developer relations. You start with inspiring developers. This is on the border of dev marketing, right? So you start by inspiring your developers. Why should they build for you, right? They have a day job. They have other alternatives. Should I do a pose? No. They have other things to think about, right? Why should they think about your platform or your infrastructure to build on top of? And then you educate them. You enable them to work on your platform. And you move them to from being aware to being actual proficient. And then you build the tools and services. You build the SDKs. You build the sample codes. And you enable them. But the most important thing is feedback. There's two ways you can call developer relations. A person who works in developer relations could be an advocate or an evangelist. I'm really, really allergic to evangelists. Because for me, evangelists, other than having religious connotations and doesn't work in half of the world, also means that praise the Lord, here's our SDK. Praise the Lord, here's our API. And if it's broken, it's by design, right? And you're to blame because you're a developer and you didn't understand it. An advocate is, here's our API, we hope it works, but if it doesn't, please let us know and we'll fix it. And we apologize that it sucks right now, right? That's the type of conversation that we, like as a developer, you need to talk to other developers at their level. And you can say, hey, listen, it's actually broken. When I had my open source startup, a submarine corps in Australia pinged me and said that they're using my software. And I'm like, no, don't do that. You're insane. This is open source software that I wrote. Don't use it to launch anything, please. So like, I think talking to developers at face value is the most important thing that we could do as developer relations, right? So that's the difference between advocates. Advocates are bi-directional. They take feedback from the products and bring it back to the product team to tell them what works and what doesn't. And they constantly improve the product for the developer relation, for their developers as an audience. Yes. Should I talk to your manager about this as well?
This might be a bit nitpicky, but you said inspire, educate, and enable, where enable is actually providing the APIs in this case.
Yeah.
How can you inspire and educate about SDK that doesn't exist yet?
So first,
there's no way to develop things for your platform.
So first you build the first API, right? And then you tell people, let's say we're building an API to create thumbnails for images. You say, hey, listen, guys, right now you write 10,000 lines of code in order to create all these different types of thumbnails. Now we have an API. It's kind of sucky, but you can just upload an image and you get this thumbnail that is awesome. And then you educate them, you create a sample. And then you say, hey, listen, if you're a C++ developer, here's an SDK that enables you to do that. And then you collect the feedback that it doesn't support JPEG, and then you go and implement that as a feedback, right? So that's the loop that always needs to happen.
The problem is, how do you kick it off? It's connecting to the previous question, the previous part of the presentation. How do you justify the initial investment to create that first crappy API? Because until you do that, you don't have anyone to inspire or educate.
So what you need to do is inspire and educate your CEO about the next slide, okay? And then ask me if it works, right? So this is what I think the developer funnel is, right? And for every company, it might be slightly different, but it usually is like that. For those of you who don't know, who don't come from marketing, a funnel is a process that your users go through, and as they go through the process, less and less of them actually manage to pass that stage. So if a website funnel would be 1,000 people have landed on a website, 500 have actually chosen item, 200 have actually put their credit card and address, and 10 have clicked buy, right? So there's a funnel. Developer relations has the same funnel. You start with being interested or aware. Then you become proficient and start building. and then you actually publish or use the API, and then you define a success. Like for Slack, monetizing was a success, right? Now, if your CEO understand that you're going to create a funnel where at the end you have a target that is aligned with his targets, with his board, then he's going to say, heck yeah, you're awesome, and you should build your developer relations, and you should build an API. You should tie the API to the end goal of the company, what your CEO is measured on. And if it's not, you should tell him, hey, an API is a bad idea, because there's a lot of pain and suffering with maintaining an API that is not loved. Okay, so any questions on the dev funnel? So this is a dev funnel. Your job is to move developers through the awareness, proficiency, usage to different degrees, and then success. And your levers are different activities. So interested, could you give me an example of an activity that will raise awareness? A meetup, speaking an event like I'm doing now. It is the #1 fear in the US, public speaking. People would rather be dead than the person speaking about the dead person. Sorry? Blog posts. Blog posts contributes to not just being interested, but also education, right? You could say hands-on labs. You could say hackathons. You could say community, right? There's multiple activities. These are your levers. These are your yadiyot that you can move back and forth in order to move developers through the funnel. So you should measure you could first of all build the funnel for your company. Build the funnel for your audience, and then put measurements on one side. How many people land on so interested means people landing on our dev site, and we're going to measure that. Build actually means creating a token, and we're going to measure that. Usage means active token that is used on a weekly basis, right? So these are examples of measurements. And levers are, we're going to run a hackathon, and we're going to create a community, and we're going to write a blog post, and we're going to write a tutorial and a code sample. And we're going to see which of those activities actually move the levers for the funnel. Does that make sense? Everybody's aligned? Okay, awesome. So I want to give an example because some of you were like, what are you talking about? So an example is a community. A lot of people mix up developer relations with community. Community is one of the activities that you could do in developer relations. It is actually, I don't know if it's the most useful, but it's the most known. At Slack, we started without a community management, and I'll show you what we've done. But I want to go through different companies and how they manage communities and which impact they generate, okay? So we all know, hey, everybody's happy, and when there's a community of developers, an API is successful. I don't know if that premise is true. Sometimes it is true, and I'll give you a few examples. At Microsoft, about 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I started running a community around roundtables. We invited, it was a highly curated community. We invited CTOs and CIOs into meetups and a lot of Army people because they like to buy Microsoft stacks. We invited them into a roundtable. This was highly curated. The people who spoke got a lot of money for speaking. It was a very, very high quality community. We chose who's going to be in the community. We invested in paying for the place, for the food, and for the speaker. It was really tied into sales goals, right? So what we wanted to move is the monetization. We wanted developers to buy the licenses in order to use our API. So the learnings from doing that, my learnings, is that you can run a high quality, high touch, scalable solution if you have shitloads of money and shitloads of people. And you can only justify that if you make a lot of money out of that activity. So it needs to be tied into an actual ROI. And you can use vendors, and we used to run train the trainer. So we used to trained people to do this at scale or across the world, but we actually paid them. And the ROI was monetization. The impact that we moved the needle was monetization. Look at this. This is a community activity that actually moved monetization, not just awareness. Sorry? Vendors, we call them regional directors, which is an awesome title for someone who comes and speaks in events. These were people who were job was to go into these forums of CEOs and CTOs and talk about why Microsoft Stack is the right stack for third parties. Yes, we did train the trainers, and we brought these people. They were trained in Seattle, and we got them to go and speak all around the world. That's how we scaled it. But we actually paid them. This was a highly curated set of communities. Okay, awesome. Impact monetization. We made good money on there. The next one is Google. Google has something awesome called Google Developer Groups. I don't know how many of you actually participate, but there's a ton of developer groups around the world. When I left Google, there were 750 developer groups all around the world. Extremely scalable. The cost is much lower than the roundtables that Microsoft ran, because we don't pay for the location, we don't pay for the community leads. We created a movement. We inspired people to go and create communities around the Google products. They created Android user group. They created cloud user group. They created all these user groups because they loved the product, because they loved educating other people. The content was a mixed bag, and also the people were a mixed bag, because if it's not highly curated, you might get some cookie eaters. Cookie eaters, for those of you who don't know, people who come to events to eat cookies. There are a lot of cookie eaters, especially if you don't pay for the event. The problem is that if you have a very scalable, very wide range set of community activities, you might get a high percentage of a cookie eater. And then real engineers say, yeah, you know, it was a shitty event. I met a lot of people who were not really engineers. I'm a hardcore engineer. I don't associate myself with this type of community. So cookie eaters really could dilute your community and move it from hardcore engineers talking and educating other engineers into, yeah, it was a mixed bag. Some of the people really creeped me out, right? Experience. So you need to still think about how do you create a good way to like mitigate cookie eating is to talk about hardcore problems. It's like having core sessions that really bore those cookie eaters. If you talk about fluffy stuff, they'll come and flock you. But if you talk about hardcore C++, here's how you do performance in Android, they go away. So having hardcore content really helps with upping the level of your community. So here's my learnings. You can get without a lot of money, you can get mixed quality, and you need to always think about the quality, high touch, not curated, and scalable community activity. You need to connect it to awareness, because this is breadth. This is a lot of people around the world talking about your products. Using volunteers, it's really interesting. Volunteers, people actually volunteer a lot to run communities for you. And you need to analyze why are they doing it and which stage of their life are they doing it. Because once they get kids, they stop doing it, right? And then you need to find someone else who's doing a community. I haven't found a single person who's running a community volunteering who has a 1-year-old. I've never found this person. You do that? I'm not worthy. You're awesome. Woohoo! Let's give her a round of applause. But usually you need to think about what's the motivation of your volunteer, and how can you create a chain of succession. And the impact is actually awareness. If you think that you can run these scalable communities and you're going to get high quality solution, you might be a little bit disappointed. How many people, for Slack, it was how many people land on your dev site? Yeah. Like how many people, what's the top of the funnel? Community at this scale is top of the funnel. How many people am I bringing into the, or aware of my platform? That's a great question. We can talk about that. Usually you can't. Sometimes you can with things like you give them a code and then you can see, or you do it in an event and you ask them to actually go and register and then you follow that user. Right? You can. There's Salesforce has a solution that you can log an event and then see that user, what are the developer relations activities that you've done for that user, all the way into like a paying user. And we use it right now. And beware of the cookie errors. And then Slack community, we took a very different strategy. When I started the Slack developer relations, I thought that community is not my biggest bet. My biggest bet was the big partners. I wanted Salesforce to integrate with Slack. I wanted Jira to integrate with Slack. Like the developers were very important to us, but the top developers were the critical piece of the puzzle that I needed to solve in the first year. So I invested most of my effort into hiring partner engineers and not community managers. So how did we run communities? We actually hacked communities. So what we did is that we convinced other people to talk about our platform for their community. That was pretty awesome. So if you look at the most common tutorials that you will find in Google about Slack, it's the AWS advocate talking about how to build Slack bots for AWS, and the Watson advocate talking about how to power your Slack bot with Watson, and the Google Cloud dude writing a blog post about how cool it is to write a Slack bot on Google Cloud. So we actually hacked it. We convinced other platforms and other communities, and we, instead of creating our own communities, we hacked into third-party communities. This was awesome, but it was only successful because we were very sexy. Slack was, every developer wanted to use Slack and wanted to build on top of Slack. So all these platforms, they really wanted to tie into our brand. So they did a lot of our work for us. So you can build a high quality, high touch, scalable, but you need to be sexy. You need to have a useful product that is really awesome, and then you can hack into many, many other communities. I always tell startups, they say, oh, it's really hard to build a community. I say, go to meetup.com, look at the audience that you want to find, that you want to engage with, go to the community manager there and offer them to buy pizza and to do a session. 8 times out of 10, they will say, yes, this is awesome. Because they look for 2 things, content and pizza, right? And you're offering those 2 in a single email. So your meetup.com API is your friend as a developer relation. And here, we measured integrations. So we wanted to create, we wanted to hack into all these communities because we wanted these developers to integrate these third-party products into Slack. So we measured different places in the funnel. Okay, so we talked. I give you 3 examples. Yeah.
Why do you think that there's a high touch? It seems like quite low touch. You sort of delegate the activity to other communities and other evangelists or other advocates. Just wondering why you considered it high touch. What did you experience that was so high touch?
So I'm going to be an advocate.
No.
You are right. This is a bug. I apologize. It's actually high quality, low touch, and scalable. Awesome. Thank you for debugging. Yes, that's what DevRel is all about. When people call you on things, on a bug, you say it's a bug. I feel like my voice is now projecting better. What's happening here? Okay, so let's talk about. This is the last portion of my presentation. Let's talk about measuring the right things. When you measure developer relations things, you need to measure the hardest thing that you can influence and the one that is most connected to your business. If you don't, you cheat yourself, you cheat your manager, and you cheat your company out of funding, right? So here, for example, at Slack, we looked at the amount of developers with weekly active tokens. Why is that a good, useful measurement? Because developers are using the API. They're not just like registering, they're using a token. They're building an app that is actively used every week. So there's the number part of the measurement, but also the qualitative part of the measurements, right? If it was just number of developers that are active, that would be an easily cheatable number, right? But if they use the API on a weekly basis, that's a much harder metric to cheat, right? And the other one was percentage of paying customers that are using the platform. Again, really hard to cheat and really aligned with the business outcomes, with the goals of what the company is trying to do, right? The whole population of paying customers, how many of them are using the platform? No, so totally two different measurements. One of them is so when I look at Slack, there's two measurements. One of them is the developer impact, and the other one is the customer impact. The customer impact is the second. How many of people who are using Slack are using things that developers built? So the second one is I measure how many IT engineers have integrated things that developer built. The first one is how many developers do I have in my platform in order to build the useful things for the IT manager, right? So remember, the Slack is a three-sided market, so it's kind of complex. Sometimes you just need developers to. Sometimes these are examples. Don't use this as your metrics. These are done by professionals, and they're only applicable for the certain platform that I give this example for, which is Slack. It's really easy as developer relations to cheat ourselves. Also as founders, as many people, as human beings, it's really easy to lie to ourselves. But these are examples of what I don't like as common developer relations measurements. The vanity metric. Developer engaged, or more colorfully called developer touched, right? If you want to touch developers, do them at your spare time. Don't do that on the company dime, and nobody cares how many developers you touched. Because it's an internal metric, nobody cares, it's easy to cheat, and it doesn't mean anything to anyone else. I've seen many companies, many developer relation orgs that come to the CEO and said, hey, we reached 10,000 developers. Who cares, right? How many of those developers are actually using your platform? How many of them are turned into a paying customer? How many of them actually haven't gone in from a hackathon and have completely forgotten about you, right? So you need to measure the hardest thing. Developer registered, really easy because you can easily hack it. You had a question. No. Developer engage is like, I went to an event and I talked to 1,000 developers. My number is 1,000. That's now here is 1,000. That one is I actually gave a useful talk, and developers were convinced, and now they came to the site and actually used my code, and they actually use it on an ongoing basis. So it's a precise outcome. So this is a task, and this is a goal, right? That's the difference. Developer registered. Why is it easy? Why is it not a metric? What can you spend money on to get developer registered?
It's either free,
Facebook or Google or something like that, right? You can run a campaign and then go and drink margaritas for the rest of the quarter, right? So getting developer registered is a non-metric. The last one, which is really tricky for developer relations, is, yeah, we're so aligned with the metric, with the company goals, we're going to be measured on revenue. This is very dangerous because then you'll be considered a sales org, and you're going to have revenue quota. And that's a sad, sad life for developer relations, right? You don't want to do that. If you want to sell something, be in sales. Don't be in developer relations. Because then, if you have a revenue target and your developer tells you, hey, this API sucks, you tell them, no, it doesn't suck. You should buy it now, right? There's misalignment between your mission as an advocate and the developer's mission. So never measure yourself on outcomes that you can't control or that create misalignment between what you want to do and what your developer audience wants to do. Okay? Awesome. General lessons learned. Some of them have been talked in this session. Some of them are random from my brain. Think about breadth versus depth. Always think about your developers as like, who are the top developers? Who are the ones that I want to have the white glove versus who are the everyone and how do I reach them? I think that when you start a platform and API, your top developers are very important because these create the lighthouse wins that bring the entire developers. They validate your API and your platform. So focusing on the top developers is useful strategy to begin with. Align and measure on the right thing. Advocacy versus evangelism. What is the right answer? Advocacy. You didn't sleep during that section. This is another important thing. Where you live in the org matters. If you're under sales, from my experience, it's not an optimal place to be. And if you're under marketing, it's again not an optimal place to be. Specifically because developers will say, yes, this is another salesperson, this is another marketing person. The best place I found it to be is under other products, because then you can bring the most amount of value to your product team, or under engineering, because then you're considered a badass, right? These are the two values of actually bringing developer relations. So either engineering or under product, or if you're in Amazon, it's the same thing. It's like you're under a single-threaded owner that owns both engineering and product. Okay, so where you actually in the org matters, and choose wisely there, and where the money comes from matters. If the money comes from marketing, then you need to drive awareness, because that's where the marketing people care about. If your money comes from product, they care about quality integrations. So when you get funded as developer relations, always think about what is important to the person who's actually funding my org. And this is the most important thing. You always think about what's in it for me. That's another bug. It should be a WII.FM. What's in it for me for developers? Always, if the product is not useful for developers and you advocate it, you lose your name in the market, right? So make sure that you're advocating for a product that is awesome, because talking to developers that suffer from your API is not a good experience. But having developers that actually benefit from your API is the most fulfilling experience I've had in my career. Thank you very much. Should we do questions? Yes.
So I want to address that last point. There's the point around like advocating for just the product that's the best product, right? And I think that's important too. You don't want to advocate for something that you don't believe in. But I think on any product or any API, there are going to be gaps. And I feel part of the DevRel position is filling those gaps as well.
Yep.
So like when you're talking about the content engineering writing, it's not just me saying that this API is going to solve your problem. It's about me going in and coming out, trying to understand what your problem is, creating an end-to-end story or some sort of sample that helps you take it from there.
Yep, a developer narrative.
So is that a line with what you're saying? Or is that
It is a line. What I like to coin is the minimum lovable product. I think the minimum viable product is not the right thing because it's just viable, but the minimum lovable product. What is the minimum product the developers will actually love? And then I try to measure another metric, which is mean time to hello world. How fast it is for a developer to come into your website and to get started with a hello world or the equivalent of the hello world. I actually bring my PMs, ask them to sit on their hands and get them to see how long it takes developers to do that on their platform. It is a delightful experience for me, not so for them. Yes. Which stage do I recommend to start what? Sorry? Building the organization of DevRel. First of all, you need to have a developer product. Again, DevRel is expensive, so having DevRel that sits on their asses and do nothing, that's not useful. So you need to have a certain something that developers could use. And then I would hire developers, and what I do is in the interview, I ask them to build on that product, on the API, and tell me where it sucks. So their presentation is feedback for why developers should use it or should not use it. And I actually seen people build awesome feedback loops. When I came to Slack, I came with a list of all the things that I think are broken in the platform, and I got the job. So that was fun. No, you need to understand that, like, once you have an API, and once you want to actually move developers through the funnel, developer relations is critical. If you don't have developer relations, then developers would probably not come. Yes. So your job, that's a great question. What happens if they hire you for a DevRel role in a place that is highly siloed between product and engineering and marketing? Break the walls. The best way I found to break the walls is to actually bring developers to the office and bring all the stakeholders to hear their feedback. We've done that at Google. It was mind-blowing how effective that was, because the product org will never listen to you. Because you're like, yeah, one developer told you that this sucks. That's not indicative information. And if they look at the API, not a lot of people are using it. Yeah, DevRel is not doing their job. But if you bring developers to actually give them feedback and say, hey, it took us 4 days to figure out OAuth on your platform, they say, oh shit, we need to solve that. And so that's from my experience, bringing the actual customer in and creating customer obsession across all these teams, then they are aligned to actually solve your problems. Yeah, talk to your boss. Yes, I know that.
So a lot of the things in this presentation, and generally in developer relations, apply really well to products that are either cloud products or at least some sort of open platform. Basically, somewhere where a developer can go in by themselves and say, hey, I want to write something for this product.
Yeah.
What about on-prem enterprise products, ones that do not have any value to a developer by themselves, but only to developers who work for the companies that use said product? So it's kind of challenging then, because, for example, where the money comes from and what's in it for me, those things are heavily tied to the sales cycle, right? So a customer evaluates my product based on, amongst other things, how good my APIs are.
That's a great question. So the question was, what happens if the developer activities is actually a post-sales? So you sold the platform, you sold the tool, and now developers need to use it. We had that at Microsoft with SharePoint. SharePoint, you can't use it until you install it in your org, right? So the way to position it is to secure the platform. The key is that after the sales, if people don't integrate with SharePoint and make it more useful, then the next sales cycle is much harder. So you need to tie developer relations activity with actually retention of users. How many of the users that installed the platform actually renew their license? And then your activity become from a community activity and breadth activities to more like a train-the-trainer post-sales activities. So I would go and I would hire people that do training or trainers, and then it's a more of a success management, if you know that term. Is that like successful implementation of the platform, and the measurement would be renewal of license. Does that make sense? Cool.
Do you think in that case it's okay
If you like pain, you should definitely connect with sales or that's my experience. But again, it could be totally wrong. I'm sure there are companies where the API, like it actually ties really well into sales. But again, developer relations need to be developers empowering other developers to utilize the platform or the tool set in an awesome way, and the money needs to come because of the value. Right? That's my thesis. I could be wrong. I haven't done this a lot of time, but that's my thesis for developer relations. Yes. Sorry. Then you. So again, controversial. This is just me. I like to hire DevRel who are engineers that are actually experimented on the platform, that have high empathy for their developers. It's not a requirement for like program managers. So there's multiple professions in DevRel. Developer advocates need to be an engineer, need to be proficient. Program managers need to know the process, but still have empathy for developers. We do an eng interview -1. So for DevRel level 5, we do an eng level 4. Does that make sense? In the Silicon Valley, I live in San Francisco, so we have a big community of developer relations. They're awesome. Yes.
Do you need some kind of platform for developers to spread their products, integrate with your?
So what you're asking, what I'm hearing is that do you need a marketplace? In many, many cases, the what's in it for me is monetization, and you can enable that monetization. At Slack, there is a marketplace, there's no monetization, so you can't bill through the platform. At Twitch, there is monetization, so we provide you with the audience and also with the ability to monetize your integration. Again, the key is to analyze what's in it for me. Why am I building for this tool set, right? Why are people building for Android? Some of them, most of them are doing that to build a business. Some of them are doing it because they like fart sounds on phones, right? That was one of the most common, that was the most successful early app, right? A lot of people that are building for Slack are actually building for their own team. So about 70% of the integrations that we had on our Slack platform were actually people integrating and doing custom integrations just for their own team. They didn't do it for every other developer. So always understand the motivation of your developer and what are they trying to achieve. And then tie your activities towards that. If you haven't read, if you haven't Googled PRFAQ, it's a really awesome process. It's called working backwards from success. PRFAQ is a PR. You write the PR, and then you write the FAQs for that product. It is an awesome Amazon best practice, and you can read it on the web. Okay, I think last question, or we can stand here awkwardly for a couple of minutes. Okay, I think that was my key. Oh, yeah, there was another one.
I mean, if
yeah.
So one thing in your slide where you described the organizational structure of DevRel in Slack, there were 4 groups that all make sense. One was kind of missing for me, and that is engineering. Who's actually writing the APIs and SDK? And attached to that, assume that who's writing some of the APIs is R&D. How do you kind of influence the way R&D work to meet your goals as DevRel? Because they're writing an API that they need as part of the product. You want that API to be a public API used by your developer community, but it sucks, and you are ashamed to publish it as is. How do you get them to write?
Wow, you really, we need to work on like I really need to talk to your manager. I think from my perspective, the API needs to be built by engineering. It is not developer relations role to build an API. I think the line stops. The API is engineering. SDK could be developer relations, depending on the proficiency of your organization. But the API needs to be built by developers. And if the engineering team is not tasked with building mission-critical third-party API, then you should not have developer relations. You should tie it into objective key results for the company. If the PMs are psyched about at Google, all the PMs are psyched about what developers could bring. Same thing for Amazon. People are psyched by developers because they realize the value the developers could bring the product. If you need to explain if you need to explain a lot why developers could help, you should probably choose another company and do developer relations there. I'm sorry I'm ending with that note. It is the best profession of the world, and you should definitely do that all around the place. And you're all awesome. Thank you.